Okay, I think we're going to just go ahead and get started. So we have our clinical trials and biorepository team here with us today to present for you. And so I'm going to pass it over to them and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Sarah Chung. I am a rheumatologist seeing patients at the University of Washington. And I also am the clinical lead for our rheumatic disease biorepository program. And I'll pass it to Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Schaefer. I'm the clinical research manager for the Division of Rheumatology at the University of Washington.
Hi, my name is Bobby Han. I'm a rheumatologist at the University of Washington, and I'm also conducting a clinical trials for various rheumatic conditions.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. We'll keep this presentation part real quick because really the true meat of it are your questions. So without further ado, let's go into participating in research, clinical trials, and registries.
And so, Sarah, it actually sounds like we have Steve Wright on now, so I just want to see if Steve wants to say a couple things before we get started.
Sure.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm trying to turn my camera on. I don't know if you can see me. That's okay.
We can't yet, but we can hear you.
Probably better that way. I'm the executive director for the Arthritis Foundation in Washington, Oregon, and Alaska, and I want to thank the University of Washington Division of Rheumatology for the great support. These are crazy times, and UW, you guys have really stepped up, and appreciate you putting on this Lunch and Learn today. So thanks for everything. Really, really happy to be here with you.
Thanks, Steve. Likewise. Okay, so let me see here. So just as an overview, there's a lot of different types of research that exist really in rheumatology, and I just simply wanted to give you a lay of the land to orient yourselves. Starting from the left, basic science research typically involves animal studies that are looking specifically at mechanisms of a disease. It's kind of a nice way to best approximate cause and effects in disease, because you can make a mouse model of rheumatoid arthritis and kind of examine the various immunologic pathways. Translational research takes basic science findings and applies it to clinical care. It's a two-way street, so concepts in clinical care and also human samples collected from our patients are then also brought back to the lab to study those same concepts that are done in animals in humans. And we can talk about that more in a moment. Population-based research really gets at the epidemiology of a disease. Usually these types of studies use large databases of patients with one particular condition and allows us to see associations with various variables and trends in disease outcome. Clinical research is really kind of the heart and soul of research, of medical research, where you're taking an intervention, most of the time a new medication drug, but it can be something like an exercise program or whatever intervention, and you're applying that intervention to a group of subjects, and you're comparing it to placebo or some other comparator. And then importantly, I did want to just mention qualitative research, which is obtaining and extracting data directly from patients' perspectives and opinions regarding their disease and their experience of the disease, and really get that quality of life measures that are so crucial. So this data is usually collected via patient-reported outcome instruments or survey data. And a lot of clinical trials can include, actually most clinical trials include this qualitative data. And all of these research realms can overlap with one another. In fact, that's what makes findings so powerful. So we don't actually have time to really delve into qualitative or basic science research today, but we did want to just focus on translational population and clinical research. And I'll just kind of go into these two. So as I mentioned before, translational research is honestly kind of like a two-way street between the lab and the clinic. So let's say that there is a mouse model of rheumatoid arthritis, and that mouse has particular antibody. And in the lab, they found that this one particular immune pathway was actually really important in the disease. And turns out that there's actually a medication that targets that particular pathway. Well, in that case, they might actually turn to the clinic and take a patient with rheumatoid arthritis who has that particular same antibody and apply that medication that applies to that particular immune pathway and see if that patient actually benefits from that as the mouse did. And so that's kind of one way. The other way is really taking human samples from patients like blood, urine, or even tissue, and then bringing it back into the lab to actually study human cells and those same immune pathways that were looked at in animals, looking at them in mice. Translational research is actually very, very important. And I think really it's distilled to the fact that we're kind of keeping human samples at the cornerstone here. And we're using human samples to study conditions. And it also provides us with the potential to provide more tailored clinical care so we can make better decisions about which medications to choose and which medications might be effective for particular patients. And importantly, it keeps the clinical questions, the stuff that you're talking about with your doctor, really at the forefront of researchers' minds in the lab. So while translational research is really important for disease mechanisms, it's hard to kind of get a sense of real life trends. And so that's where population studies are actually really important. So these epidemiologic studies take groups of patients, cohorts of patients with a particular disease and studies trends in their disease outcomes over time, can look at factors that affect how severe the disease is, outcomes like hospitalizations or particular organ involvement, as well as the quality of our delivery of care for these patients, and gets at environmental and social exposures associated with disease states that we probably can't get from kind of a sanitized lab setting research. I think that population studies are really important because they increase our knowledge of disease in real life. And they provide us with the opportunity by following people over time to see how the disease evolves over time. Population studies are also used a lot in quality improvement studies. So say we want to know folks on methotrexate, they should be vaccinated for the flu. And so by looking at a cohort of patients on methotrexate and calculating a percentage of those who are up to date with their flu shots, you can see, that number is great, or that number is not so good. And we know where to direct our care efforts. I will also add into this slide that I actually had forgotten that population studies are really important because of the diversity of patients ethnically, socioeconomically, that are included in one particular disease state. And so it allows us to see how this disease manifests in a wide variety of human beings. So how do we actually do translational and population-based research? Really, the instrument at our disposal are registries and biobanks. So both allow for storage of information over time. The difference here is that a registry stores information, whereas a biobank really stores actual patient samples, such as blood, urine, or tissue. In a registry, patients will choose to be part of it and have data collected on a variety of things. It really depends on the project or the research study question, but usually how their disease initially presented, the labs, the imaging findings that might be pertinent, medications that they're on currently or tried previously, any other tests that were done, factors regarding their lifestyle, and family history, which can get at the genetics. This data can be used not only in the clinical setting, or research setting, but also can be utilized to identify patients who might be good candidates for a particular clinical trial or other sort of study. So there's a lot of different uses for a registry. Biobanks are where a participant actually donates their samples, and it can be at one point in time, or it can be over a course of years. These samples are de-identified, and then they're actually stored in freezers for kind of preservation and utilized on a rolling basis in experiments that are done in the lab. Now, importantly, biobank samples are always, almost always, accompanied by registry data, because really the value in that human sample comes from what we know of that human experience. And so usually we will see both registries and biobanks together, and you may often hear the term of a biorepository, which alludes to both a registry and a biobank being linked together. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jennifer Schaefer, who will tell us a bit about clinical trials.
Thank you, Sarah. So clinical trials, as Sarah mentioned, they are research studies that prospectively evaluate the effects and values of an intervention in human subjects. So an intervention might be a drug trial, it might be a device, it may be a behavioral intervention. It's a pretty flexible term. And then when we say prospectively, it means that patients voluntarily enroll on a clinical trial, and then after they've enrolled, then they receive that intervention. Clinical trials are a great source of information, of valuable information to contribute to medicine. So clinical trials are not only the gold standard, but they're how we get new drugs on the market available to patients. So clinical trials generate all the information that we then take all that information and hopefully it's positive, and we take it to the FDA for application for potentially a new drug. And the FDA looks at all that information and decides whether or not the drug is safe and effective, and if they approve it. Go ahead, next slide. Oh, going backwards, I think.
Oh, sorry about that. This is strange. Okay, I think this is the...
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
So clinical trials typically have 4 phases. Phase 1 studies are generally done, a lot of times they're done in healthy volunteers. They're also done in a much smaller patient population than the other phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 studies are definitely looking at the tolerability of the medication, and they're also looking to see what properties, how does the drug interact with the human body? So how quickly does the body metabolize the drug? They're looking at that kind of information. If a phase 1 study has positive results, then we look at a phase 2 study to kind of further expand our knowledge of that drug or of that intervention. So phase 2 clinical trials really look at the effect of the drug on the human volunteers. And it's also often looking at several different doses to see which dose works the best on patients and is also kind of has the least potential side effects. So if a phase 2 clinical trial has positive results, then they start planning for a phase 3 clinical trial. So phase 3 clinical trials, we see a really expanded patient population. So we get a lot more diversity in the patient population. We also get a lot more patients enrolling on that study. I'm gonna grab some water real quick. Croaky voice. So phase 3 clinical trials really look at the clinical effectiveness of that medication, and they're also looking for side effects. So when we see a larger group of patients receiving an intervention, we also start to be able to parse out some of the potential side effects at that larger population. So if a drug or if a study has positive results from a phase 3 clinical trial, typically we'll see a pharmaceutical company will then apply to the FDA for approval of that drug. So phase 4 clinical trials are kind of an interesting set of trials. They're typically done after a drug has already received approval from the FDA. So clinical trial or phase 4 clinical trials are an opportunity to get long-term data on how well that drug will work or how well that intervention will work, and to continue to learn about the side effects that might be potentially. Phase 4 studies are also used. We do a lot of phase 4 studies in our clinics that are looking at drugs that work and how well can we identify what patient populations that drug might work for. We call these biomarker studies, and so phase 4 studies can also help us to not only learn more about the drug, but also more about how well patients will respond on that drug. Next slide. Perfect. So there's always risks and benefits to participating in clinical trials. So potentially for risks, you're oftentimes doing an experimental medication or an experimental treatment. So we don't always know all the potential side effects that could occur. So there's always the possibility of unpleasant or serious side effects when you're receiving an experimental treatment. There's also the possibility that the treatment doesn't work. It may not work for you, it may not work for other people. So there's always that possibility. This is kind of part of our testing phase. And I think one of the things that really impacts patients a lot is that there is definitely a time commitment involved with participating, not only in clinical trials, but in research in general. We're asking you to voluntarily commit some of your time to help us out. So a lot of our studies, patients are coming in every couple of weeks or every month. You spend a lot of time working with the clinical team. But I think on the benefit side of that is that you really get a lot of personalized care with the research team. You gain access to a lot of expert care. You're being followed up more regularly than you would if you're just going into the clinic for your routine care. Clinical trials and clinical research is also an opportunity to play an active role in your own healthcare. And it's also potentially an opportunity to gain access to a new potential treatment before it's available to the public. And it also, I think, clinical trials, they're the only way that we can bring new drugs to the market. And so we definitely need participants and volunteers to participate in our clinical trials so that we can be a part of bringing these new drugs to the market. Next slide. So we get asked this a lot, kind of what does participating in a clinical trial entail? So we're typically looking for patients, when they come into the clinic, we're looking to see, do they meet the criteria to participate? So a lot of times clinical trials have pretty strict criteria on who it can enroll. We want to make sure that that person has the correct diagnosis. We want to make sure that they're not on any other medications or have any health concerns that might make them participating in the study a risk. So we're kind of looking through all that information and doing a lot of screening process before patients enroll. And then if you are potentially eligible for a study and you're interested in participating in it, we bring you in for what we call an informed consent discussion, where we talk all about the study, we give you all the information, kind of let you make a decision of whether you want to participate. And then if you do want to participate, we start to do a screening process where we're looking through medical history and medications and disease to see if you're eligible. And then patients who are eligible, they typically come into the clinic about once a month. Every once in a while, it's every 2 weeks, but typically coming in every once a month for the first year, depending on how long the study is. If a study goes on more than a year, typically after that first year, patients come into the clinic less frequently. And then when you are coming in the clinic, the reason that you're coming in the clinic so often is because we are monitoring your health and your safety. We are doing experimental interventions, so we do want to make sure that if you're participating in the study, that it's safe and you remain healthy, and that your health is not being compromised by being on the study. And we're also checking to see, is this drug working for you, and kind of seeing how well is this drug affecting you. Next slide. I'll pass it on to Dr. Han now to discuss the targeted anti-aromatic therapies.
So thank you for your nice summary on clinical trials, Jennifer. I'll talk about this rheumatoid arthritis as a success story for biomedical research in the 21st century. No, like 20 years ago, we had very limited treatment options for rheumatoid arthritis. We had methotrexate, like sulfasalazine, and gold shots. Many patients had to be on steroids to control their disease. But now we have these more than 10 targeted therapies for rheumatoid arthritis. So this is a slide that I borrowed from the presentation in our medical conference at the University of Washington. And this illustrates what's going on in your joints when you have rheumatoid arthritis. So it's highly complex process. And as you see here, these T cells recognize autoantigens here, and then it stimulates B cells, which produces these autoantibodies. And these T cells and these autoantibodies stimulate macrophages, which produces pro-inflammatory cytokines, including TNF and the IL-6 and the other cytokines, which leads to inflammation in the joints and the damages in the cartilages and the bones. So then we have these new targeted therapies with 5 different mechanisms of action, which inhibit the specific pathways in this process. So advantages of these medicines, they are highly selective for these pathways without really affecting other pathways in your system. That will decrease the risks for any potential side effects. So all this advancement was made possible through a contribution of the patients, including Arthritis Foundation, to our research, including clinical trials. As Jennifer pointed out, it takes a very long time to develop a new therapy in medical condition. It is actually, it takes a lot of time and efforts to assess a new drug, partly because huge diversity in patients and their diseases. So each patient is different, and each patient has different diseases. And some patients respond to the certain medicine, and some patients don't. So we have to actually study these medicines in a large number of patients to get the average response rate of the medicine, and to see if those medicines are really effective and safe in our patients. So there is still unmet need in rheumatoid arthritis, although there was a huge advancement in treatment, because although many patients are responsive to these medicines, many patients still have some active disease. So the achieving remission is still not as high as we hope, like maybe in less than 40% of the patients. So one of the approaches that we are studying in the University of Washington is that we are actually studying some baseline markers in the blood samples and the other samples to see if those markers can predict the response to the certain medicines. So then we want to actually identify those patients who have who are more likely to respond to a certain medicines by studying those markers. So those studies are now going on, and we'll have more data by the end of this year. The next slide. Yeah. So I just want to show you how to get the information on participating in this research. There is a site called clinicaltrials.gov, and it lists all the ongoing clinical trials in this site. And you can also access the websites of the medical centers which are conducting the clinical trials. And this is our website for the University of Washington. Arthritis Foundation could provide information on the ongoing clinical trials. There's also a NIH registry where you can get information. The next. So to learn more about this University of Washington Division of Rheumatology's commitment to research, patient care, and education, visit our website at www.rheumatology.uw.edu. So thank you, and then I think we are open to your questions.
Thank you so much. Let's see here. So it looks like no questions have come in yet.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, of course.
So tell me, how is COVID research being sped up? We talked about the timeline, and how is that different to typical research? Are you guys involved in that at all, or do you know what's happening?
Actually, yeah. Do you want to take a stab at it, Jennifer?
Sure. So COVID research is definitely at the top priority for the University of Washington, and they actually did develop a very specific kind of pipeline for how to get a study going in an expedited manner. So the COVID research it's taking a little bit different procedure. It's far more hands-on with a lot of groups. Typically, when we start a new study up, we're responsible for bringing that study up to get patients in. And with the COVID research, there's a lot of committees to make sure that, because everyone's very interested in COVID right now, and so there's some committees that are basically reviewing studies to make sure are there two investigators that are kind of asking the same question, enrolling. So I think everything's trying to make sure that there's no overlap. There's a lot of collaborations going on between investigators, just because you don't want to send 5 different study teams in to those COVID patients when you could just send one unified study team in to kind of work with them. So we're seeing a lot of collaborations, and we're seeing a lot of kind of expedited processes in order to get the research going.
What would typically, how long would it take from phase 1 to get to phase 3, through phase 3?
Normal clinical trial process, and I actually have a slide that it's a very rough estimate of it. It depends a little bit on a normal non-COVID research, depends a little bit on how long you're going to be doing your studies. So a study that is looking at patients for a 12-week process is probably going to get through the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies and try to go to the FDA much faster than a study that's looking at patients on a long-term drug that they want to test that drug for at least a year. So I think the typical FDA approval process for clinical trials I think it's about 7 or 8 years to go all the way from exiting the lab and ready for human subjects to the point where they are applying to the FDA for approval. So it's not a short process.
So nobody has a crystal ball here, but if current trials are started for COVID, you know, what would be the earliest possible time that those therapies could be made available at a, you know, huge amounts for the entire population? Was that within a year, you think, 2 years, or are we 5 years down the road?
So I can partially address this, but then I think Dr. Hahn might have something additional. I think there's two separate issues. The first issue is getting a treatment to the point where it's approved by the FDA for use is one step. The second step is getting a drug that it's widely available is a completely different process, because you're dealing with having to manufacture that treatment. And I think that those are two very separate things. And I think COVID is, it's a situation that we haven't really dealt with in clinical trials very frequently. It's a very unique situation. And it kind of throws all of our traditional process timelines out the window a little bit, because it has had such an impact that it is a priority. So I think on my end, it's very hard to kind of give a timeline and give that estimate, just because we don't really know what we're dealing with, and the process is just very different than we're used to seeing.
I wanted to acknowledge someone raised their hand, and then I think it went away. I think the name was Jeff.
Jeffrey Carlin?
Yeah, Dr. Carlin. Oh, hi. Let's see, I may stop my share just in case.
Dr. Carlin should be able to speak now.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I don't, so we've been doing biorepositories at Virginia Mason for decades. Okay. And we have something like 700 people with RA in our biorepository, and 500 and some are lupus patients and whatever. Plus we have tissue and whatnot. So if you guys want to work with us and share with us, I don't know if Jane is on the phone or not, but Jane got the invitation to tune in on this stuff. So I'm speaking for Virginia Mason if she's not available. But nevertheless, we also have a bunch of clinical trials. And I think one of the problems that I have with the people in the community is that we don't know what's happening at the University of Washington. You guys don't know what's happening at Virginia Mason. And there needs to be something going on to promote cooperation. So if you have a clinical trial that we have patients that may be candidates for, we could send them to you, and vice versa. We need to stop working in our own little silos. And I think one of the things I've also in the past talked to the Arthritis Foundation about is having some sort of transparency so that the patients will know what's available within the community, and the physicians also have the ability. So if somebody at UW wants to see what trials I have going on, or vice versa, or if somebody who is at the polyclinic or someplace else has access to that too. And I think we need to come up with a way to develop a platform to share that information. Anyway, so
Yeah,
that's just an observation and a thought.
Yeah, I'll chime in 100%. I'm new faculty joining, University of Washington, but I noticed that too. And I think really research, just generally, research is much more powerful when you collaborate with other institutions. The Benaroya's Biorepository program, for example, is a machine. And you're right. I think that there does need to be more kind of interdisciplinary and also interinstitutional collaboration. So yeah, I'll email you later.
Yeah, please do that, because we should probably, figure out offline how to cooperate more. I know that Jane has tried to do this in the past with, you know, some success and whatever, but maybe with some new blood at the University of Washington, we can cooperate for the greater good.
And if we at the Arthritis Foundation can be any kind of conduit, we're happy to play that role.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was some way that this could be posted on the Arthritis Foundation website, that we could, you know, have, you know, these are the clinical trials that are available in the community. And, you know, because you mentioned, I think that Han talked about, Han rather talked about the Arthritis Foundation, but I think as a way to facilitate this for patients, because, you know, Arthritis Foundation is a place where people will go to for independent information and unbiased information.
So we have, you know, sometimes have difficulty recruiting patients, and also patients have very limited information on this clinical trial. So I think it's a good idea to have this like some one big you know, source of the information on clinical trials available in the area.
Yeah, agreed.
I will add on that, I think the clinicaltrials.gov website does list, it's kind of an interesting searchable database. So you could put in rheumatoid arthritis, and then you could also put in Washington State, and you can find a list of all of the clinical trials available, either enrolling, past enrolling, on the clinicaltrials.gov website. And generally, if you click through the sites, you can see the sites that are enrolling for a study. There's not always contact information, but I think that website it is a good resource, but I think that one of the challenges is that patients don't always know to go to that website. But it is, all clinical trials are listed on that website, and it's designed to be kind of that universal database. It's not specific to RA, but you can kind of search through specific studies. You can also find past studies to see who's done what study previously as well.
I'll just chime in one last thing about on the COVID topic, just from a registry standpoint, and wanted to bring to attention to some of the attendees who may be, you know, patients themselves, that there has been now an establishment of a global COVID Alliance registry. So not the biobank part, but simply data. And we're beginning to collect data on how our patients with rheumatic disease who are on immunosuppressive medications are faring when they get COVID. So hopefully it kind of just, you know, highlighting the importance of and the power of registry data. So hopefully the results from what we learn from this registry are going to be rolled out quickly within the interval, you know, months or so. So that's another way I think that we're trying to get data from our, you know, patients who have COVID. I haven't seen much in terms of questions yet, but just to get
raised.
Yeah, we do have another hand. So Barbara Pascucci,
do we want to
on right now?
Sure. Hello. Thank you for the webinar. Good afternoon. My question relates to what Sarah was just speaking of with the COVID registry. I was wondering how COVID would affect a younger person living in New York City or Brooklyn and commuting, who would be taking adalimumab and oral methotrexate to control their arthritis. And I guess that, you know, there just doesn't seem to be any data, but, you know, I have a family member who that applies to. And, you know, it's concerning how long should they insist with work that they get to work remotely versus, you know, they can't afford a cab or an Uber every day from Brooklyn to Manhattan and back. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for, you know, patients who are on these medications, it's very, you know, it's understandably a really anxious time and a scary time. You know, theoretically, these medications, you know, particularly, you know, adalimumab, which is a TNF inhibitor, methotrexate, you know, they're theoretically thought to interfere with our immune system, suppress our immune system, and so the concern is that, you know, that should a person on these medications get COVID, that their COVID would be very, very severe. As to whether or not that is indeed fact, we still have to study, and that's why this registry is actually really important. And that's what I think we are truly looking for. We want to know what percentage of our patients who are on these medications develop, you know, other complications besides just the pneumonia aspect of it, and how, you know, do they have to go to the hospital sooner? Do they need oxygen longer? Or is it really actually surprisingly similar to a person who may not be on these medications, you know, that particular medication, and looking at many, many variables that affect how a person does should they get COVID, such as the other comorbidities that they have, the exposures, their job, their family members, who they're surrounded by, all really factor in. So not really a clean answer to your question, I think, but certainly, you know, it is on the forefront of our minds. And that's why this registry was rapidly established, because we need to quickly find and gather data on our patients who are on these medications. I don't know if Dr. Han has anything else to add to that.
Sure. So, yeah, no, as you mentioned that there is no data whether these medicines could increase the risk of like COVID infection, or it could actually have any impact on the prognosis. No, if patient has the infection, but we also always have to consider benefits and the risks of these treatments. And if we stop these medicines, those patients with the rheumatic conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or other rheumatic conditions could get deteriorated, which will cause severe harms to those patients. So, and another thing is, in fact, now that we are studying these certain anti-rheumatic drugs in treating symptoms of the COVID infection. And we are actually studying those IL-6 inhibitors like Actemra or Kevzara, and the certain JAK inhibitors like baricitinib in treating COVID infection. So, so which means that we don't really know if those medicines are really beneficial or harmful in terms of the COVID infection. But so our recommendation is that we are to continue these medicines and take all the precautions. And if patient has infection, then maybe they have to hold the medicine to see how they how their symptoms respond. But if patient does not have any infection, and then we ask them to continue all those medicines while taking the precautions.
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
I have a general question. If we think, just how do you design a trial if you think early aggressive intervention is the way to go for treatment for RA? What does that trial look like? How do you even design that to find out if that's appropriate or not, and in which subgroup of population of people with RA?
So yeah, I agree that this early aggressive intervention will be highly effective in achieving remission in rheumatoid arthritis or minimizing any joint damages. Then we have to actually recruit these early onset patients, which is not always easy in the tertiary medical care center like University of Washington, because we are actually seeing other patients who've been seen by many other providers. then refer to us. So first we have to, you'll be able to recruit those populations with a very early onset condition. So maybe we have to actually collaborate with the rheumatology clinics throughout the state to identify those patients. Then we always, in order to prove the effectiveness of this new approach, we should have a control group. So because otherwise, we don't know how effective this new approach is, and so then we have to do we have to compare like many different groups in those populations. So maybe we have to study certain medicines, and then we also have to another group who are treated with standard care like methotrexate. Then we can compare those outcomes in terms of their clinical symptoms and the radiographic progression and the other patient-reported outcomes in the short term and the long term. So, so that's how I designed these studies.
Thank you. Could I ask another question here? As from the Arthritis Foundation standpoint, how many of you are participating in the Walk to Cure Arthritis, which is virtually happening next Saturday? I know you guys have a team. Thanks for that. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Laura and Dr. Elkon. Dr. Elkon is our medical honoree. You've been really supportive, so we appreciate that. Great support. Thanks.
Thank you. We're happy to be a part of it, Steve.